Glad to have Katie Earp with us tonight. She's been a hydrologist for the USGS in Southern Nevada for 10 years. She's from Southern California and got her Bachelor of Science in Geology from the University of California at Santa Cruz. And she's worked for the National Park Service in New Mexico before moving to Las Vegas to work for the USGS. Katie recently got her master's degree in civil and environmental engineering from UNLV, and she is a proud civil servant and a steward of public lands and loves to explore and learn about the Mojave Desert and the Great Basin. And we are extremely glad to have her with us tonight. I listened to a version of this presentation about a week ago, and I thought it was interesting, so I asked her if she would come and talk with us, and she agreed.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm very excited to talk to you tonight. Brenda saw this and asked if I would present, and I love sharing the science we're doing, so I'm just pleased to do this. So this is a study that we did with the USGS on water temperature of the lower Virgin River, Nevada and Arizona. We were contacted by the Bureau of Land Management and Nevada Department of Wildlife to study water temperature of the portion of the lower Virgin River that's kind of, downstream of the Narrows or the Virgin River Gorge in Utah, in Arizona, and comparison to the fish. So we're looking at the native fish here, and the theory behind all of this is, what is the temperature of the river? Are the fish doing okay in regards to that water temperature? So I am with USGS, like Brenda said, we're out of Boulder City. And the Boulder City office of the USGS, it's the Nevada Water Science Center, and we go all over the state. We have two offices, one in Boulder City, one in Carson City, and we just go. And I like to tell people I stand in rivers, but we do groundwater, surface water, water quality, all over the state from Nevada, including Gold Butte. Doing a lot of Gold Butte. So a little bit about the project history, and I touched on this, but the working hypothesis that came to us, was not from ours, is that the endangered fish are threatened by higher water temperatures. This kind of makes sense, right? These fish have evolved for so long in these habitats, and as humans have entered the landscape, or at least post modern humans, that they've affected that landscape and have changed that habitat. So the question is, or our role with the USGS is trying to get a quantitative understanding of stream temperature and how that relates to flow. So this was a 3-year study from 2019 to 2021. And we really focused our data collection from June through September. We're looking at maximum temperatures. So we just wanted to look at the summer and see kind of at the extreme high end, what were these fish, what was the river doing, and how were the fish reacting? So to get the study reached into context, here's our box of Mesquite. So we're here in Mesquite, and we're talking cross. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the cross the state line right there. And if we zoom into the city of Mesquite, this is about a 20-mile reach from Littlefield, Arizona, Beaver Dam Wash, and then going down past Bunkerville. And our lowest spot is right at Flat Top Road, Lower Flat Top Road, which is one of the exits. It's like the truck stop exit right as you're driving into Mesquite. So in this reach, we had a bunch of temperature loggers that we threw out into the water. We have some continuous USGS stream gauges, and those are just constantly measuring flow throughout the year. We've really focused this work around the irrigation diversions. There are two major irrigation diversions within the kind of Mesquite area. One is the Mesquite diversion, and then one is the Bunkerville diversion. And so those are happening right around this X, or this little spider mark, and then the second one is right in here. There are a couple other diversion points along the greater reach, and that we did not study, and those are on private land. So data collection focused on collecting water temperatures, collecting flow data, so that's how much water there was in the river, and kind of quality assuring all of this data to the USGS standards. All of this data is available to the public on our NWIS site. We call it the National Water Information Site. think now we just changed the name this year. It's now called Water Data for the Nation. But that is a public website where you can get all the data. I think it's the best part about one of the best parts about the USGS, because all of this data is up there for you guys to use. So this picture on the left, this is somebody taking a discharge measurement. So that's flow. That's how much water, the volume of water coming down the river. So they're standing in the river with this wading rod, and at the bottom of it has a sonic velocimeter. And so it's sending a beam of sound actually out and measuring how fast the particles in the water are bouncing back. So it tells you how much water is in the river. And this is a pretty neat thing because, it's pretty easy to measure how much water is in a pipe or how much water is maybe even over a concrete flume or weir, but measuring water in a natural channel with a shifting bottom, a bunch of sand, which is what the Virgin River is much more difficult. Our temperature sensors were put on T-posts. So they would be kind of a T-post like in the center photograph with a ring on it, and then you kind of work to kind of hang in these little loggers down into the water. It looks a little bit crude. When we have a stream gauge, it's a big structure. Sometimes they're concrete, sometimes they're like little houses. Sometimes they're just like a highway box with like a door on a couple, like a couple post legs and then a box on top. But the Virgin River is quite fickle and things get washed out all the time. And so these T-posts actually have a much lower profile than some of them, some other equipment. And so these are kind of designed to be able to handle a giant flood or no water in the river. So they kind of have to fit that range. And then some of the ways that we quality assure our data. So this is Jose taking a cross-section profile. So we want our data right on the side of the river where we can access it easily to represent the whole of the river or whole of that stretch, that cross-section. And so we do a bunch of things, checking the data and approving it and just making sure it's kind of the best quality data we can. All data was taken as 15-minute increments. And I think eventually we ended up having like 15 sites over the course of 3 years with about 4 months of data for each of the study periods. And the field work is fun. I love getting out to the Virgin River. You get to wade in it. You just walk on the sandy bottom through the reeds. This was just a few weeks ago. This is in late January. Jade measuring, taking some verification readings. So these are independent thermometers that we bring out to measure that water temperature, to confirm that our loggers are doing the right thing. We also have to use an ATV sometimes, and ATVs are very popular in Mesquite, obviously. But there's parts of the river that are just not accessible by car, right? So going back to the fish, I mentioned at the beginning that this whole study stemmed from the fish. And there has been a lot of work in the upper Virgin River to improve fish habitat and try to, I think, not delist, but an effort to improve the habitat of some of the enlisted species. There are 5 or 6 native species on the Virgin River, but 2 of them are listed as endangered, the woundfin and the Virgin River chub. So up in the upper Virgin River, they've done a bunch of science, they've done a ton of work protecting these species. And in the 80s, one of the famous desert fishes biologists developed thermal maximums for these 2 endangered fish on the river. And developing these maximums is a common way of doing kind of fish biology and river ecology to protect those species. But they put them in tanks and then they kind of increase the temperature until the fish start freaking out. And that's really crucial to understanding these species. So they did these studies and figured out that the most sensitive species, the woundfin, had a behavioral thermal maximum, a BTM, of 28 degrees Celsius. And this is the temperature at which the fish just have some metabolic issues and start swimming a little bit differently. And then they identified a critical thermal maximum, a CTM, of 31 degrees Celsius. And this is when they start like dying, basically. So these are the temperatures that were established back in the 80s. We're going to kind of use these as thresholds to look at our data. So our data is just water data. I'm not a biologist. I didn't do any biology work here. But this is how we're going to kind of link the 2 concepts together, or is the 28 degrees and 31 degrees. So these are generally temperatures that the fish have trouble at. So here's a first look at some of the data. Like I said, this is 15-minute water temperature data, and we had a bunch of different sites, over a dozen sites. These are 3 of the sites just stacked on top of each other, just for convenience. If you put them all on the same graph, it looks kind of chaotic. These are 3 sites. So Sand Hollow, that is near the town of Scenic. It's above the Mesquite diversion. We also have the Scenic Bridge, and that would be below a diversion, one of the irrigation diversions. And then we have above Bunkerville diversion, and that's right in the town of Mesquite. It's right near the city. So you can see the temperature. This is about a month of data in 2019 from July through August. And the water temperature ranges from about 20 degrees Celsius to, I don't know, 34, 36 degrees Celsius. And what I see in this month of data is a big wide swing, right? And so what we're seeing is a diurnal. It gets hot during the day and cools off at night. Hot during the day, cools off at night. I'm going to add we had talked about those, that BTM and CTM, those thresholds for the fish. And so I'm just overlaying those on top as a reminder of 28 degrees, 31 degrees. You can see already, this is not a cherry-picked month of data. This is just a very representative month of data. You can already see we're several degrees above those thresholds. And all of the sites are tracking very well. You can see some differences in the sites, but they all are showing they're many, many degrees. There's several degrees above these thermal thresholds for the fish. So if I zoom in, so let me go back just one step. We have these diurnals up and down, right? So we're going to zoom in on one of them and just look at what one day looks like. So again, this is 15-minute temperatures, and this is the course of a day, August 2nd, 3rd, in same period, 2019. And you get to see that low to the high, and again to the low. So that's just one day, cold at night, hot during the middle of the day. And what we see is that these temperatures were not just several degrees above those thermal maximums, but we're also several degrees for more than half the day. So this is not a blip of hot temperatures. These are extended duration periods where these fish have to, that are above where the water is hotter than those thermal maximums. This is common throughout July and August of each year. You see some of it starting, depending on the year. Sometimes it starts in June, sometimes it goes through September. But these are not short little deviations from cold temperatures. The water's cold. The water is hot for most of the day. Then if we look at temperature distribution, so like I said, we put a lot of loggers in this 20-mile reach. We just wanted to see what it was doing throughout, from upstream all the way to downstream. And the graph, I'm going to spend a little time just describing what it is. To the left, I think it's to everybody's left, is the farthest upstream sites. So logger 1, 3, 4, the furthest upstream sites. And then they're in order going all the way downstream. So to the right is the furthest downstream sites. So logger 1 and 3, that's Beaver Dam Wash and Littlefield. That's far up, into Arizona. And then logger 15, 18, 19, that's down in almost past the town of Mesquite, down towards Bunkerville. And what we see, this is just on one day, these are the maximum water temperatures, is that there's kind of a break between these upstream sites and all of the downstream sites. So the 2 upstream sites, Beaver Dam Wash and Littlefield, they're kind of below these critical thermal maximum and the behavioral thermal maximum. They're cooler than those 2 thresholds on this day. All the downstream sites from Sand Hollow all the way to, I think it's behind my screen, but Flat Top Drive, they're all several degrees above those thermal maximums. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with Beaver Dam Wash and Littlefield, but there are a bunch of springs that pop out right at Littlefield. So on the main stem of the Virgin River, it adds about 50 to 60 CFS, so cubic feet per second, of water coming out from the springs. And the springs are a constant temperature year round. So in the summer, they're actually cold springs. They're about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, so they're very pleasant. And in the winter, they're actually warmer than the river because the river is cold. It's coming from Utah. And so actually the springs feel warmer than the main stem of the river. But what these springs are doing is they're coming out and they're going into the river right at Littlefield, and they're actually lowering that main stem temperature. So they're having an effect. They are reducing the overall temperature of the river right around Littlefield. Beaver Dam Wash is just a spring-fed wash, so it's just purely those springs. So that one's cold anyways, no matter what. And what we see is all of the downstream sites don't really see that effect of those cold springs anymore. They're just hot. So here's just a picture of Beaver Dam Wash and the Littlefield Springs. If you haven't been, they're very cool. Go on a weekday, not a weekend, because they get crazy crowded. Beaver Dam Wash, the average temperature during this period is about 21 degrees Celsius. The Littlefield Springs, those are generally downstream of the 15 bridge. They've kind of been destroyed a little bit, but the water's still coming out. I don't know how they were dammed up by the I think by the road crews. But you can see they're really lovely. And what the biologists say, the people who've done the fish counts, is this is where the fish like to hang out. They see the highest numbers of native fish counts in these areas, and then downstream we're not seeing as many native fish. So the other part of this study was flow. How much water was in the river, and did that impact the water temperature? So what we see, these graphs are 3 different years, so 2019, 2020, and 2021. And this is discharge measured at the USGS gauge at Littlefield, Arizona. This is a really neat gauge. It's been there. I think it's the oldest gauge, the oldest US gauge in the state. It's been measuring since like 1927, which is, I think it's so cool. So it's been around for a long time, and it's always recording. You can go and look it up right now, and you can find how much water there was, an hour ago. And so we separated out what the river was looking like during the summer period. So from June to about October of each year. So in 2019, we had kind of a high snowmelt runoff coming in June. So that usually May and June is when the snow starts to melt in Utah. So we had high runoff, and then kind of nothing happened. This is base flow, or during the summer. In 2020, we had base flow. It was kind of a drier spring. And then we had one monsoon in August, and then base flow. And then in 2021, luckily, we finally had a full monsoon period. And we had a lot of monsoons, and each of these peaks would be a monsoon flood. You can see some of them are a little bit smaller than others. So base flow at Littlefield is about, let's say, 100 CFS during the summer. So you can see this blip gets to like 200 CFS, double the amount of water, 800 CFS, so 4 times the amount of water. So we can measure it, we can see it. And so the question was, do those monsoon floods reduce the temperature? If we are thinking, if we add more water to the river, does that actually impact the temperature or lower the temperature? This is just a picture of what a flood on the Virgin looks like. It's chocolate milky. It picks up a lot of sediment, and this is actually this river was kind of its geomorphological history is a flooding river. I mean, this is what Southwest desert rivers look like. They like to flood. They pick up a lot of sediment. They get that rich red color, and the fish, a lot of the native fish actually love this. This is where they can kind of outcompete the invasive fish. I should say this is the bunker filter version. If you have not seen it, this is the town of Mesquite. You can kind of see the town of Mesquite behind us, and people go and recreate here all the time, walk their dogs, drive ATVs. There's a low head concrete weir right here, and then the irrigated water is diverted right behind these reeds. So the question that I was mentioning was like, does higher flow impact temperature? Does it lower temperature? So we pulled out on that 2021 year when we had a high monsoon season, we pulled out one of the floods. This is what a standard hydrograph of a flood looks like. So it comes up really, really fast and then kind of slowly tapers off. This one got up to, we have base flow here about 50 CFS, pretty low, so it's kind of dry period. And then it jumps up to 400 CFS. So you would have seen it, like at this point, you could not walk across the river, it's too much water. And overlaid on top of it is the water temperature downstream. So this is not at Littlefield, because Littlefield can be, is influenced by those cold springs. So this is a little bit further downstream. And you can see that strong diurnal temperature that we saw at the very beginning, up and down every day. And right at the period of this flood, we see that diurnal shortens, so the amplitude gets shorter. But then it picks up right when the water, the discharge in blue, starts to go back to base flow, the water temperature starts to rise again. So we have a few days of lowered temperatures during the storm, but then it goes right back to normal. So again, I'm going to overlay that BTM and CTM, those thermal maximums on top, 28 degrees and 31 degrees. And you can see that this this monsoon flood did reduce the temperatures below those thermal maximums, right? It did drop those temperatures significantly, but as soon as the water returned to a normal level, the temperature rose back up higher than the thermal maximums. And one thing you see, there's kind of a question of, is it more water in the river that's reducing the temperatures, or is it that the air temperature is just kind of cooler when a monsoon, everybody knows out here is like the temperature breaks as soon as the monsoons come, right? It's a little, you have some relief from the super hot weather. So you have reduced air temperatures, and you also have cloud cover, which reduces the solar radiation, incoming to the water. So there's a combined effect here. It's not strictly just that there's more water in the river. So we talked about how increased water can maybe lower temperatures, at least temporarily, just for a few days. But how about water that's maybe less than base flow? So like lower water. So this is a period from June 9th through 15th, 2021, where it was a very dry period. This was before the monsoons hit during that year, and it was just really low base flow. So this is an area, this is that Bunkerville Diversion Dam. Our previous picture, we were looking upstream at this. Now we're looking downstream. So this is the same concrete dam. You can kind of see it popping up right here. And so this is upstream looking down, and this is just the main stem, what it looks like. We have full flow, so from bank to bank, you can see it's probably about a foot deep across the whole channel. You can also see that it's being diverted off to the left, like I mentioned before, for irrigation diversion. So that's upstream. And this is what that irrigation canal looks like. So this is the Bunkerville Diversion Canal. And again, a lot of water going through it. It's the same day. It's just looking to the left. Now, if we look downstream, what happened is that very, very little water actually made it over the diversion dam. And so during this period, 97% of the water remains in the diversion canals, and there's 3% of the water in the main stem. And what it looks like is an inch or two of water. This water increases to a temperature of like 37 degrees Celsius, which is like 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's just kind of a trickle downstream. Now, this water does get returned back to the river, the main stem of the river, at some point through diversion return flows. Usually for this period, for this specific area, it ends up being about 2.5 miles downstream, 2.7 miles downstream, where the fish, if you were a native fish, you would have to kind of survive in these 100-degree water temperatures. So another question that the biologist had, the fish biologist, was, we know the main stem can be hot, but what can we do? Can we kind of make microenvironments on the river to improve fish habitat? Now, this is a really common approach in a lot of other rivers. You kind of build up pools, deeper pools and shady areas, that kind of thing, to help the fish, maintain more stable temperatures. And so we had a couple different comparison sites. For the first one, in this canal versus main stem, so we had a temperature logger in the irrigation canal, and then we had one in the main stem right at the same place. We also had upstream versus downstream of a dam. So are the dams themselves cooling the water in any way, or is there any difference in how much water is taken above the dam and below the dam? Then we also had the classic sun versus shade. In this case, we actually had a cliff shade, like a permanent cliff, but a lot of times that shade is from vegetation, so willow breaks and that kind of thing. And what we saw is, you'll see they separate a little bit, but we saw very little difference in all of the sites. All of the areas were hot. They were several degrees above the thermal maximums, and they didn't differ from their comparison site. It was a little bit surprising because when you walk in the diversion canals, if you're like walking in the river, you walk into one of the canals, it feels colder, but it's just an effect of the shade right there and how shallow the main stem is because of the sand where it dumps out. It's deposited a bunch of sand, so it gets really shallow right there, and the sun heats that up. So it's really hot right at the toe of the canal. So then the canal feels kind of artificially cool, but it's not. They're like the same temperature. Again, upstream and downstream of dam. The dam itself didn't change temperatures. I'm going to go back to the canals versus the main stem. The other thing about these dams and these canals, it's kind of hot water going in, hot water coming out. The infrastructure itself isn't impacting the water temperature. There's not changes, and it's not heating or cooling, right? They're just not making changes. The water's flowing too fast. This is a well-mixed river. Things are just going in and out, and it's hot. And then sun versus shade, there was not a lot going for it. Again, because the river is well mixed, things are kind of moving past. You're not getting extended periods in extended areas where the water is just cooler. I will preface this with the fish are smart. All fish are smart. They know how to find cooler spots. I believe there are cooler spots in the river. It's not most of the river. And those cooler spots on the Virgin River are right near the sediment, so right where the sand comes out. And we've put some temperature loggers down in the sand, and the sand was much cooler. It was more consistent with the low temperature, the nighttime temperature. And it just didn't get that solar radiation thermal boost during the day. And the fish know that. I'm sure they're living right near that edge of the sediment, the sand. The problem of the Virgin specifically is that the sand shifts. It's called a shifting bed. And it's so shifty that it's kind of impossible to measure. I'm not impossible, but it's very difficult to measure those differences consistently. So the fish know it, but it's not meaningful habitat. It's not something you can kind of improve on. So then the question was, so we kind of know what the temperature and the water temperature is doing now, but what was it doing in the past? Like I said, the Virgin River or at Littlefield has a long-term record. We've been stream gauging at it since 1927. And then we've been collecting water quality since 1947, which I think is remarkable. I think it's so cool, especially out in the West. Like we just don't get these long-term records. And so we had daily water temperature recorded from 1947 to 1987. This is what that looks like. You'll see this is about, this is 40 years of data, and you can see it goes up and down. And this is the annual variation. So high in the summer, low in the winter. And yeah, it looks pretty good, right? This is a picture of what the site looks like. So this is I found this old photo. I'm sure there's older ones, but this is from sometime in this 1967 to 1972 period. And then in 2024 today, you can see this cliff, this cliff in the background kind of anchors it. So I'm looking at this protruding cliff. I'm sure most of you or all of you have driven across. This is the 15 right here. We've had some comparisons. It does look a little bit different, but it's the same river. I love the Virgin because it's been so consistent throughout this recorded history. It's the Virgin. It's still behaving as the Virgin. I think it's a really neat kind of wild river. So we dug into the data a little bit closer, the historic data, and we pulled out the July and August water temperatures only to compare those, because again, our study period was only looking at those summer temperatures. And we pulled out mean, minimum, and maximum annual water temperature. So this is the maximum water temperature in the July and August period for each year. And then the mean temperature in that 2-month period for each year. And what we saw was that the maximum temperatures have actually stayed pretty similar. They kind of ranging around 30 degrees Celsius, but the minimum temperatures have been rising, and they have risen an average of about 3 degrees Celsius over this period. This is matched with air temperatures that have been recorded by a National Weather Service station in Littlefield. And the air temperatures have also seen this increase, about 3 degrees. And what this means is that the river is not cooling off at night. So the maximum during the day, still getting hot. It was hot back then, it's hot now. The data is showing that. But it used to cool off at night, and now it's not doing that. So overall, our takeaways, as Brenda, we were talking in the beginning, it's hot, really hot. The daily temperatures often exceed those maximums, and they stay elevated for more than half the day. It's just these aren't casual blips to very hot territory. It's just a hot river. It's hot all summer long. One thing that we did record through our flow measurements is that during the summer, there are times when the majority of flow is in the canals, the irrigation canals, and not in the main stem. So these are only in portions downstream of diversion dams, but there can be kind of significant reaches where there's not a lot of water in the main stem. And then the temperature of the diversion canals don't differ significantly from the main stem. And that was really to say that we weren't seeing that there were refuges along the river. This river has so many miles of just the sun beating down on it. It's a shallow, wide river. And so it's kind of hot water coming in, hot water coming out. Looking at flow, at base flow, the temperature and the flow are poorly correlated. One doesn't predict the other, mostly air mainly, except for two conditions. And extreme low flow raises the temperature. We saw that picture downstream of the dam where there's just a trickle of water, an inch or two, and the sun's beating down on it. It is raising that temperature. And then elevated flood flow from monsoons can temporarily reduce the temperature. So that works. But again, there's some effect, or there's probably a lot of effect of reduced solar radiation from cloud cover, and just it's cooler during a monsoon. All of this data is available online. There are links and you can find it. I love NWIS. I think it's so cool. You can look all around the country and look at all this data.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Does anyone have questions for Katie? So basically what you've said is that we live in a hot place and it's hot, and then it gets hotter, and then it's hot.
Yeah, and you guys probably knew that. It's nice to see the data. It's nice to one thing that I was really surprised at looking at the historic data is that it's been hot, and my understanding of water use in the Mesquite area, the Virgin Valley, is that it hasn't changed drastically. There's been a lot of growth, but the actual patterns of the use haven't changed. A lot of the current drinking water comes from underground, from groundwater. They've been irrigating since settlers have come. They've irrigated from the beginning, right? This is why they were there. And so those types of things have not drastically changed. The flow is the same because of the springs. We kind of have a constant amount of flow in this reach. Looking at that historic data, what has changed? It's maybe the climate, like it's not getting cool at night in that period. There's more questions about how the fish are related to this reach and how well they're acclimatized, and kind of what is driving the lower numbers for the fish in this. It may be a more complex answer than temperature, but I was pretty surprised to see that temperature is it's been hot.
We have one question. Can you find the chub and woundfin in the Virgin River near the St. George area?
Yes. Yeah, they find very strong numbers even through the gorge and down to Littlefield, but in the St. George area, like the upper reaches, have decent numbers, I believe.
And then are the fish bios doing population trends at these monitoring sites? If so, what are the population trends?
Yeah, so they are. I don't know all the numbers. So Endow does it, Arizona Game and Fish does it together. So state, and then Utah State, or whatever I don't know the acronym. They kind of do it together, right? Because it's a tri-state area. And they've been monitoring for easily 10 years, probably 15 at the minimum, in repeat spots, and they usually monitor twice a year. And they go all the way down to, in the Virgin River, or in this area, they go down towards Halfway Wash. They decided a long time ago that fish have a hard time living below Halfway Wash. Below Halfway Wash, the river goes underground, and sometimes there's not flow, it looks dry. And then Lake Mead was actually pretty far up the Virgin Arm for a long time. Now that the lake has received, it's not as much lake anymore. The Virgin is now free down there. We've gotten the river back, which is kind of interesting, but they just don't even look past that point because it's too kind of impaired. So they still look down towards Halfway Wash. They go to Riverside Bridge, but they measure in the gorge, they measure at Littlefield. There's a number of sites that they go to. I don't know the trends. I know that down here they don't find a lot, but I've been on a few trips with them and I've seen every native fish. So I was happy with that. I've seen them all at least once. The fish do better upstream.
We have another question. Does the rise in overall temperature encourage invasive species over native?
Probably, yeah. And like I said, I'm not a biologist. What I know is one of the primary invasive species is red shiner. Red shiner come from the Rio Grande in like lower Texas. And that's a hot, sandy river. Very much like the river, or like the Virgin. I think they look very similar. So those fish love the heat. They can handle anything. And so, yeah, they can handle those higher temperatures for sure.
Okay, so the chub and woundfin are not like pupfish that can withstand very high and low temperatures and drastic changes in salinity? Correct.
Yes, and well, okay, I should step back. There is the woundfin and the chub are very different fish, and those thermal maximums, that thermal maximum study looked at each fish individually. but when they're presented, they're just kind of lumped together as one native river fish. They like different environments. One likes I can't ever remember which is which, but one likes the muddy, shallow, sandy river, and one likes like a fast flowing, stronger river. So they're just really different fish. The more sensitive, I think it's the woundfin is the more sensitive. No, maybe I can't remember. One can tolerate much higher ranges, and it's been suggested that they can even tolerate pretty easily up to like 37, 38 degrees Celsius, kind of at the maximum, which is what the river is. And so, and you guys know this, like being in the desert, like you get acclimatized over time, right? Like the first year anybody moves out here, they have a hard time in the summer. But pretty soon you get used to it. And I'm sure that's what the fish are doing. So there are some fish that are doing better.
What chances of survival for the fish with climate change?
I don't know. I don't know. I think and Brenda and I, we were kind of talking about this at the beginning, but for a while there was some question of, oh, maybe if we put more water in the Virgin River, it can lower the temperatures and give a better shot. And that's absolutely true. There's portions of the river that don't have water during the summer, right? Fish need water. But the reality is it's hot. And we can't change that. We can't just magically fix that. It's too long of a river. You just can't do that at this scale. But you can be clever about things and facing that reality head on. You can do things to improve the river, and you can do things to improve habitat. Certainly, give them a better shot at adaptation. I think is kind of where to go.
I think some of the agencies are considering things like, riparian restoration to make a shade cover over the edges of the water, as well as placing boulders strategically to provide like a little bit deeper area and some shade and hiding places in that as well. But again, it's almost a 200-mile river, so
yeah, right.
probably not be able to do all of it.
Yeah, and a wild river as well, like I mentioned before, is it frequently floods, things get blown out, and that's what the river is like. So, but it's worth saving, it's worth protecting, it's worth improving, access for everybody.
I think too, one of the things with the different species, those invasive, yes, are plentiful. The red shiner, like you said, is a major player in this. And we don't know at this point if there have ever been masses of woundfin and chub in this river at this point. That's not something that's been studied all that long. So we don't know if this is normal.
Yeah, that's another really good point. And we were talking about historic data, and we have water temperature records going back to 47. But the fish studies went back to fish counts started in the 70s. And so we only have sounds like 50 years of data, but we have the years come and go, and they're not every year is like another. And so you really need just long-term data sets to figure out what these fish are doing. And so this is just a little glimpse of time for the fish, and the fish's evolutionary history.
Are there any issues with nitrates and nitrites from fertilizing on nearby alfalfa farms?
Yeah, for sure. We see a lot of, especially like it's one way we can measure the nitrates and the nitrites. We also can measure like E. coli after storms running off from ag as well. And yes, another question people have had, I think people are starting to look at like phosphorus and selenium. Selenium is more natural. Phosphorus would be also coming off of another nutrient coming off of ag. Yeah, so there's water quality issues, right? And there's urban areas upstream, there's agriculture areas upstream, there's discharge from wastewater treatment, there's discharge from golf courses. So those are all, significant inputs into the water quality of the river. And then I mean, in my mind, that would be the next step is, improving that water quality.
Another question, is there any discussion of changing the ag diversion amounts, or do these water rights take priority?
They do take priority. And like I said, they've been around for a long time. I mean, these areas were founded on irrigation. The original settlers built dams. Eventually, they built dams to protect their houses, but also to do ag, and they were blown out immediately. This river is fickle. There's just a history of flooding on this river. They have water rights. They do not own the majority of the river. That is owned, but actually a lot of it goes to SNWA. What the ag does, they don't use more than they have or water rights to, but the irrigation systems are are passive, so they're just using kind of pressure head to push the water downstream. So they're taking their small portion, they just take a little bit of the river, but they kind of need a big push to get their little bit down to the fields. So that's why a lot of the water leaves the river during the summer months. There's just not that much water to push it down. You would need really improved, just really modern irrigation infrastructure to do, which is very expensive. So the ag irrigators are not using more than they have rights to, not in any way. It's just kind of an old-fashioned system that takes it temporarily away from the main stem.
Well, and really ag is not the primary
User.
no.
Yeah, not at all.
And it's not the main source of, income or anything for the valley
Mhm.
anymore. It used to
Right.
be, it was a few farmers and that was it. And now
Right.
it's, they've got the tourism and the gambling and all that stuff.
Yeah. There are upstream, there are more water rights. They've had more discussions and plays with water rights and also increased water use, just in the St. George area with increased development. So there have been a lot of discussions about who uses the water in the upper basin, but the lower one is pretty, yeah, it's been this way for a long time. And right.
Here's another question. I know this is off topic, but is the Muddy River more spring fed than the Virgin?
Oh yeah, the Muddy River is 100% spring fed. I love the Muddy River. I think it's so cool. So the Muddy River is 100% spring fed. These are the springs that come out of the Warm Springs area and Warm Springs Natural Area. This water is essentially, I mean, I joke, but it's like, 10,000-year-old water. If you go, it's warm, right? It's something like 80 degrees or something. Very pleasant. It's cloudy. It's bluish. I think the Muddy River is so cool. We joke because on the Virgin, when it floods, it actually gets muddy. It's reddish, right? The muddy is not muddy. It's cloudy because it has a lot of minerals in it because of hard groundwater, but it's not muddy. It's very clean.
The Muddy River over by Warm Springs stays that same temperature all the time too.
Yeah. And actually,
it's not cool.
I don't think you can go to it because it's a locked place, but if you know a Park Service person, there's an old boat ramp. Gosh, I forget the name of it. It's at the very northern edge of Lake Mead, kind of near the St. Thomas area.
Mhm.
And it's where the Virgin and the Muddy meet and used to flow into the lake. And the colors are two different colors, just like I think the Colorado River and the Little Colorado River sometimes are two different colors. They're two very different colors because they're two really different rivers, and it's really cool to see the confluence.
The Virgin River is more like the Colorado River, whose name actually means reddish brown.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I have one other anecdote. I was looking up some just the human history of the Virgin River. When settlers first came into the Virgin Valley, they're kind of surprised that nobody was kind of near the river, like the settlements weren't near the river. And they were up at the river that's outside of the creek that's outside of St. George. You guys probably know this more than I do. There's a small creek, spring-fed creek that comes out of the side near St. George. And there were settlements there, and there was agriculture there, but not on the Virgin River, which is a much bigger river. And they're like, why not? This is crazy. Of course, this is abundant water. And then like the very first year, it flooded and destroyed everything. It's like, that's why. That's why.
Yeah. I had an opportunity one time to read a family history of some people that settled early on in Mesquite in the Virgin Valley.
Mhm.
And as it turned out, it was my daughter-in-law's family, but I didn't know her at the time. But there were some crazy stories about, floods and just the hardships that those people underwent to settle there. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to think, I mean, I do field work all over Southern Nevada, especially in summer, and you guys know this going out. I mean, it's the Friends of Gold Butte. You guys go out to Gold Butte, I'm sure, year round.
No,
It's
hot. The summer.
Yeah, well, not in the summer. It's hot, and people back then had to endure the same heat levels, right? Yet we get air conditioned trucks and get to go back and take a shower, but they didn't back then.
Yeah, that my daughter-in-law's father, when he was a little boy, did not have shoes in the summer because they could afford one pair and they had them to go to. So didn't have shoes because he grew out of them. So I can't imagine walking on that hot stuff all the time. Joy Lane says, thanks, Catherine. I love your passion. And we all do.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love the Virgin River. I love this neck of the woods.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it so much. And it's great to learn all about this stuff.
Well, thank you guys for inviting me and for the work you do as the Friends group. So